India fires a long-range intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. It will strengthen India's nuclear deterrence. But does it also open the door to a new arms race with China? And if so, is an arms race in any of their interests? India's most sophisticated, but the launch has attracted none of the criticism from the West that North Korea faced when it tried to send up a similar rocket last week. China is now criticizing the West's silence, saying it is ignoring India's disregard for nuclear treaties. So is this the start of a new tense phase in the relationship between the two neighbours? We've got our well-informed panel of guests to help answer these questions. In New Delhi via Skype, Srinkath Kondapalli, Professor in Chinese Studies at Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University. For the other perspective, Richard Hu, an expert on Chinese foreign policy and an Associate Professor at the University of Hong Kong. And standing by in London is Martin Macaulay, an international affairs analyst. We appreciate your time, gentlemen. Before we get started, let's just run through this short explanation about how the two countries' missiles compare. Now, India wants to join the elite group of countries that openly have long-range weapons that can carry nuclear warheads. Now, the club includes the US, Britain, France, Russia and, of course, China. India began by testing the Agni 2 more than a decade ago, which had a range of 2,000 kilometres. It has since tested other missiles which can travel much further. The latest, the Agni 5, with a range of 5,000 kilometres, gives India the capability to hit most major cities in China, Iran and Southeast Asia. In comparison, China's vast military arsenal includes the Dongfeng 5A with an estimated range of 13,000 kilometres. China has the 66 land-based intercontinental missile launchers, while India has none. Mr. Kondapalli, we'll start with you. How big of a milestone is this for your country?
Number one, as you mentioned, India joins a select few of countries with the long-range capabilities to deter, number one. Number two, India with the solid propellant technologies as well as the cryogenic engine technologies with enhanced circular error probability, which means that India now has more accurate, precise attacks on selected targets. India then joins a select group of countries with these capabilities.
That's right, Richard Hu. We can clearly see that China is far ahead of India in the missile race. Yet this test was enough to trigger a strong reaction from the Chinese. An article in the state-run Global Times says India has nothing to gain by stirring further hostility. Now, is China worried?
I don't think China is getting too worried on that, because, as you said, China is far ahead India in this long-range ballistic missiles. But obviously, today's launch test is really a big milestone for India. And I pick up some news from Chinese media today. They said this is probably, in terms of range, it's probably more than 5,000 kilometers. And it's nuclear capable. And also it's a solid propellant, and it still has the potential to be mobile launch missiles. So Indian is catching up, but nobody in China is making a big fuss on that. Indian is on the way to rise, but some Chinese strategists comments that this is probably Indian Indian want to rise up quickly and take a boosted rising up stage.
Let's get your take on this, Martin Macaulay. Is there an arms race going on, or is this simply India flexing its military muscle, a kind of posturing?
Well, if you want to be a big player and to be at the top table nowadays, you've got to be a nuclear power. And secondly, you must have ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can carry nuclear warheads. If you have those two, you're really a big boy and you're listened to. Therefore, it was inevitable that India would, in fact, attempt to attain that status. It underlines the science and technology advance of India. India has the scientists, it has the engineers to produce this. We don't know how much cooperation there is between India and other nuclear states, for instance, the US. We know that there is an increasing partnership between India and the US. But China, of course, is further ahead. And China will just have to accept that India now is rising. But, of course, as the previous speakers have said, it's no threat. India is not a threat to China because it just doesn't have the military potential. The Chinese military is way ahead of the Indian military at present.
Now, on that note, let's hold on for a moment and hear more about India's justification for the test and the possible ramifications. Mr. Kondapalli, I'd particularly like to find out how you feel about the issues raised in Prerna Suri's report, and then we'll expand the discussion further. Let's have a listen.
One, now.
India's first intercontinental ballistic missile successfully lifts off. The Agni 5 is capable of carrying nuclear warheads and was designed entirely in India. It can strike targets more than 5,000 kilometers away.
India is developing the missile as a dissuasive deterrence against China, because all its nuclear programs as well as missile programs are focused on China. In fact, when India carried out its 1998 nuclear tests, it declared that it was doing so in response to what the Chinese were doing as far as their nuclear weapons were concerned.
The Agni 5 has been in the works for over 20 years and has cost the Indian government over $500 million. India says it's the answer to China's missiles deployed in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Since 1998, when India last tested a nuclear device, its nuclear program has come a long way. Sanctions that were previously slapped against it were withdrawn when India and the United States signed a civilian nuclear agreement in 2008. These latest tests aren't expected to attract any new sanctions, partly because of this tacit support. But in a country where more than half the people live on less than $1.50 a day, many are questioning the high costs. Consider this. In 2011, India spent over $46 billion buying weapons. That compares to a little over $11.5 billion spent on education and $6 billion spent on health.
India is not likely to go to war with either China or Pakistan, and therefore it is spending billions and billions of dollars developing its military and deterrence capabilities. But the military planners say that the sinews of war are always built in times of peace, and therefore there can be no compromise on strategic security.
And these acquisitions continue. Recently, the Indian Navy inducted its first nuclear submarine on loan from the Russians. It's going to take some more time before the Agni 5 can be used by the Indian Army. But today, many people are celebrating and are calling this a historic milestone. And while India is yet to sign on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the country says it doesn't believe in a first strike policy. Still, that's going to be of little consolation to two countries who are closely watching these tests today, China and Pakistan. Prerna Suri, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
So lots to get through, but we'll try. Mr. Kondapalli, let's start with this idea of money being spent. Now, surely New Delhi can't realistically compete with the Chinese at the moment, as we've been saying. So couldn't the $500 million have been spent on helping its population?
Definitely. I mean, these two things are different, actually. The healthcare, education, on which India needs to spend a lot of money. On the other hand, the issues of security are also important. There is no comparison with China here or with any other country in terms of the spending on defense or on other aspects. In any case, most of the countries today are liberalizing their economies. Many a country is cutting down on subsidies in education system, in the healthcare, and so on. So it would be unfair to comment just on India that it is spending less on the human resource development indicators. So that's number one. Number two, if you actually look at the defense expenditures, this March the Chinese finance minister had announced more than $112 billion of defense allocations. Assuming that this figure is accurate, the $112 billion, still it makes China as the second largest defense spender in the world after the United States Pentagon spending nearly $750 billion. India's spending is about $40 billion. So it's nowhere in comparison to United States or China.
You're right. It's not really as much as the United States and China, but it is still increasing its defense spending. Martin Macaulay, China does have a fair point, doesn't it, when it says the West is not speaking up, considering all the fuss made when North Korea recently carried out its rocket launch, which failed, by the way.
Yes, but North Korea, the Democratic Republic of Korea, is seen as a threat to South Korea, to Japan and so on. India is not seen as a threat to any country, and India and the West, India and the United States, are in good relations and so on. So therefore, the West is not going to criticize India. The important thing for India is that the science and technology which is being developed for these missiles and so on can have a civilian spin-off. That's the way the United States gained enormously in the 1970s and 1980s. So the Indian budget may in fact go into the military sector, but it will have a spin-off into the civilian sector, and you will get scientific and technical progress. The Chinese, of course, will criticize India, they will criticize the West and so on, but it's rather muted because they don't want to have any conflict basically at present with the outside world. They will make these noises, but they're really only diplomatic.
Okay, you say that India is not seen as a threat. I'm not sure Pakistan and China would agree about that. Richard Hu, what do you think?
Let me say that as far as I know, Chinese government never say anything critical to Indian launch. They didn't criticize Indian launch, and what they say is just report the Indian launch of this missile today. And they cite some analyst comments says India making a big step, launching the ICBM and it's nuclear capable. And so it's nothing criticize India doing that. But I want to your question, I will say China respect India as a rising power. So with rising power, obviously you need these kind of strategic weapons. As China rise up. So China respect Indians' rights, and nobody can stop Indians' rights. So Indian have its right to go that direction, which is China did 20, 30 years ago. And I don't think this is a big burden for India. This is something affordable to India at this stage. But the one thing I want to point out, this is the media pretty much focus on this is a China-Indian things. I don't think that's a purely China-Indian competition. This is something India as a rising power, it needs this strategic weapon. And secondly, this is an ICBM, or at least now have potential to be ICBM. And so this is may not be just a strategic assets for United States or for other Western countries. Maybe it's as India fully develop its nuclear program, it's probably a potential threat as well.
But I just want to pick up on one point. There have been some claims that perhaps the Chinese have been provoking the Indians, making them feel that they do have to boost their defense spending, Mr. Hu. I mean, China has been developing relationships with countries that are sandwiched between it and India, Myanmar, Nepal, Bangladesh. Hasn't this annoyed the Indians?
But Indian nuclear program is not against Myanmar or Pakistan. It's obviously it's focused on big guys. So, and also, as I said, it's something compatible with aspiration to be a big power. So,
Mr. Kondapalli, what do you have to say to that? Do you feel that India has been provoked in some way?
Well, there are security dilemmas for China for India when it considers the China factor. There is the unresolved territorial dispute. For the last 31 years, there has been a discussion on the border dispute. Nothing has come out so far in terms of a territorial dispute resolution. Number two, there has been a tacit agreement between China and Pakistan on the weapons of mass destruction transfers. China had helped Pakistan in the nuclear program as well as in the ballistic missile program. North Korea is also seen as supporting Pakistan's ballistic missile program. Thirdly, there is also the dilemma reflected in terms of the defense budgetary increases. So the security dilemmas are one of the factors for India to test this Agni 5 or other series of missile programs.
Gentlemen, Mr. Kondapalli raised a point here that we can't ignore. Chinese have two major claims on what India deems its own territory, but the most contentious is Arunachal Pradesh, called South Tibet by China. It's roughly the size of Austria, with a population of over 1 million people. India has administered it as a state since 1987, but China still claims it as part of the Tibet Autonomous Region. Both countries fought a month-long war over the region in 1962. Mr. Kondapalli, what did India take away from that war?
Well, the Agni 5 is not a response to the 1962 war. Let us be clear about it. What India is trying to do is put in place a robust deterrent capability so that its national security interests are protected. This is not something to do with the border dispute. This is not something to do with the other aspects. This is basically...
I've just got to jump in because I want to bring in Martin Macaulay here. What do you think? How big of a role has this border dispute played in all of this?
I think the border dispute is very, very important because if you look at what the Chinese military are doing on their side of the border of Arunachal Pradesh, they're building airports, they're building communications, they're building military bases, they have ballistic missiles in Tibet and so on, and they're strengthening that position. So therefore, if there were a conflict, there'd been a very, very strong position. And India has responded by saying it's going to spend a lot of money and recruit something like 100,000 soldiers to patrol that area and so on. So it is potentially a flashpoint. Now, we go back to the internal domestic politics of China, which may play a role here. The Bo Xilai scandal is ongoing. It's the greatest crisis since the Tiananmen Square massacre of June 1989. It's ongoing. One doesn't know how it's going to play out. The various factions are fighting for supremacy, and one doesn't know if one faction may in fact appeal to the military that the best thing that could happen would be an external threat. You find that in communist politics, that a communist state will then find an external threat and say, we must unify the country and so on. So all these are possibilities. The situation, the domestic situation in China and Chinese politics is very fluid at present. We don't actually know what's going on, but we know there's a conflict going on. And the military is the number one institution in China, and it could play a role in that conflict. And the flashpoint would be Arunachal Pradesh, the northern part, which they claim to be southern Tibet. So therefore, that could play a role.
Okay, Richard, you heard that. What do you have to say in response?
I don't think this is the current Bo Xilai case is something near or close to Tiananmen Square in 1989. That's exaggeration. And secondly, the role of military is also exaggerated. And so there is a Chinese domestic politics in the probe to Bo, whether his wife or have involved in the murder case of Haywood. And this is a criminal case, right? It's not something really, a power struggle on the top really split the party and then spreading to the society and then trigger a Tiananmen Square type of uprising. No, I don't think that's a right judgment to make. Now the nuclear things, on the Chinese side, they are pretty calm. And the reaction is very normal, and it didn't say any critical words about the Indians launching. And then they just cite some military expert says, okay, this is for Indian, this is a milestone in their long-range missile development. And it has a potential to, India is joining the ICBM club and develop its own nuclear deterrence. This is a symbol of a big power. So China is looking at India is growing faster and boosted by this missile launching.
Mr. Kondapalli, if you can hear me now, another sensitive issue for the Chinese is India hosting prominent Tibetan figures. I mean, is that still causing a rift?
Well, at the bilateral level, the Chinese have mentioned that the presence of the Dalai Lama on the Indian soil, as well as nearly 200,000 Tibetans living in India, is a concern for them. But there has been an arrangement between the Indian government and the Chinese government that the Tibetans will not play a political role, and also that China will strive for creating genuine autonomy in Tibet, so that the issue can be resolved. If you carefully look at the Indian statements in the recent period, there has been an emphasis that China should create conditions for autonomy, religious, educational, cultural, and so on and so forth in Tibet. Number two, that the Indian side is willing to kind of mediate so that the Dalai Lama's office and the United Front Work Department can get together and discuss about the future of the Tibetan.
Okay, let me just jump in and bring in Mr. Macaulay. It's not far-fetched right now to think that things could escalate. Just listening to those two men, with so many issues still unresolved.
There are, yes, and if you listen to the Tibetan opponents, the opposition in Tibet and in India, there are those who criticize the Dalai Lama's non-violent approach to opposing Chinese rule in Tibet, and more are calling for a violent approach to resort to violence using firearms against the Chinese in Tibet. Now, if that in fact escalates, then that could be really a flashpoint and would become a very serious situation, because China would then say to India, you must stop this, you must stop Tibetans moving from India into Tibet, and they could blame India for provoking and strengthening the conflict within Tibet and perhaps arming the Tibetan opposition within Tibet. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, but there are a lot of angry voices among young Tibetans in India who would like a violent response to the Chinese in Tibet. So hopefully it will not come to that. But of course the Dalai Lama is a major problem for Tibet, because they would like, he says he's going to retire, they would like to appoint their own Dalai Lama when he dies.
I'm sorry to get...